Welcome to our webinar where we're going to think about shame and self-worth. My name is Anne-Marie Field and I'm one of the therapeutic social workers at the Centre for Adoption Support, otherwise known as CFAS.
My name is Ronnie Sumner and I'm also one of the therapeutic social workers at CFAS. We know that many of the children who we live and work with battle with shame on a daily basis, and it really impacts on their lives and relationships. The aim of our webinar today is to firstly explore shame and how it affects us all. It's important to think of it in relation to our own experience of it firstly, so that we can think more clearly about the impact that early trauma has on a child's sense of toxic shame, and discuss strategies that may help build shame resilience and boost self-worth.
It's important firstly to think of the difference between shame and guilt, two very different emotions that sometimes get confused. This can particularly be the case for some children. Essentially, the difference between the two is that guilt says I've done something wrong, while shame says I am something wrong. Guilt is about an action, a behaviour that may not have been great, but shame is about self, an internal sense that I am bad.
Shame focuses inwardly on the bad self, whereas guilt focuses outwardly on bad behaviour. Shame sees the self as unchangeable and stuck, whereas with guilt there is a view that behaviour can change. I can learn from this and do things differently next time. The self-focus felt with shame reduces empathy. It's impossible to think about others as the emotion forces a person to look inwardly at the bad self in an all-consuming way. Guilt, on the other hand, promotes a sense of responsibility and a need to repair. Shame can cause feelings of being exposed, scrutinised and judged, that feeling that everyone is staring at me. While guilt still causes some discomfort, this is manageable and less fixed, as a person can move into how to repair and learn from whatever has happened. Shame can cause feelings of hostility, low self-esteem, low self-worth and hopelessness. This is because a person can feel stuck. I'll always be bad. Guilt doesn't affect a person's sense of self in the same way, so there is increased optimism as behaviour can change. Such intense self-loathing can lower a person's coping response, and the strategies that they learn to deal with their sense of shame may not always serve them well. Guilt, however, can motivate commitment to personal change.
Brené Brown is a social work research professor at the University of Houston in the States. Over her career, she's carried out research about human emotion, specifically about shame and vulnerability. She's written lots of books, and her TED Talk back in 2010 put her on the world stage. You can see her special on Netflix, and she's very easy to listen to, as she's very personal and human in her approach. In her TED Talk back in 2010, Brené said that shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. It's the internal feeling of being bad and seeing the world through that filter, whether that be about relationships, success, happiness, etc. This is really relevant when we're thinking of children who've experienced developmental trauma and how they engage with the world around them.
So, shame is one of the most primitive emotions we can experience. We can experience shame as young as 15 months, whereas guilt develops a little later on at around the age of 3. Again, this is very relevant when we later come to think of the children we live and work with. Brené Brown describes shame as a universal experience. Without it, there can be no empathy and human connection. In fact, she says that the only people who don't experience it are psychopaths. However, self-loathing and self-attack as a result of shame can stand in the way of making positive changes. Many of us are afraid to talk about shame, and the less we talk about it, the more control it has over our lives. Shame grows much bigger when we keep it hidden and gains more power over our lives and relationships as a result. Shame is the fear of disconnection, the fear that something that we've done or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. I'm unlovable and I don't belong.
What we know is that shame triggers our physical survival strategies. Our amygdala, the security guard of our brain that keeps us safe, will react to shame triggers with a flight, fight or freeze response, depending on our preferred strategy. Scientists at the National Institute for Drug Abuse in the States discovered in 2011 that the importance of social acceptance is reinforced by our brain chemistry. So, when we experience intense social rejection, our brain feels this hurt in the same way it feels physical pain. Shame is therefore an intensely physical experience that we feel in our body, and even more so when thinking of toxic shame that a child may experience. We will all experience shame slightly differently. Some may feel flushed, hot, shaky, have a fast heartbeat, while others may feel cold. Someone once described to me that it felt like ice to them. Because shame triggers a response from our amygdala, the ability to react in a balanced way is taken away from us. Such reactions may have helped a child survive in the past. It could be the reason they're alive. However, such survival reactions that worked then may not serve a child well in the present when they're safe and being cared for by responsive and loving parents.
Brené Brown talks of the 3 different survival responses in relation to shame. Move towards, seeking to appease and please. We see this when people are overly apologetic and appear to be over the top in their attempts to seek approval. Move away, withdrawing, hiding, silencing ourselves and keeping secrets. That feeling of wanting to disappear. That feeling of I wanted the ground to swallow me up. Move against, trying to gain power over others, aggression, using shame to fight shame. A really simple example is when I think of how some people experience road rage. That deflection that bounces the shame away from them and on to someone else. Some, including Kim Golding, have used the metaphor of a shield of shame. All strategies act as a shield. Some people tend to use one preferred strategy. Many will use all strategies at different times. We all have a team of rivals in our brain, rational and emotional, each competing to control the output channel of our behaviour. When we're under stress, it's usually the emotional system that tips the balance. All strategies move us away from connection, and all strategies act to disconnect us from the pain of shame.
From her research, Brené Brown found that what you learn as a child about yourself and about the way to engage with the world sets a course for the rest of your life, fighting to reclaim your self-worth or giving you hope. Our childhood experience of shame changes who we are, how we think about ourselves and our sense of self-worth. Our stories of worthiness begin in our first families, either ready to explore the world or fighting to reclaim our self-worth. Believing we are good enough is heavily influenced by our parents. On a general level, we live in a never enough culture, and society has lots of prerequisites for being worthy. For example, I'll be worthy if I lose that stone, if I get that job, if I buy that house. Modelling by parents is really important in terms of sending the right messages to children.
For children exposed to early developmental trauma, we need to think about this on a much deeper level. Did parents teach, people want to be with you, you bring joy, you are fun? Dan Hughes says that being liked is the greatest therapy. You are special. Parents have what we refer to as a positive delusion about their child. My child is the most beautiful child, the cleverest, the most talented. Children need this feeling of being wonderful in their parents' eyes to develop a positive sense of self-worth. People can cope with your anger, sadness, fear, distress, and it doesn't overwhelm them. The parent can help soothe them, hold the emotion when distressed, and in turn help them learn to regulate. An important message that their feelings and emotions are valid and noticed by their parent who is responsive to them. People can help you when you are struggling. People will love you even when you misbehave, when you make mistakes, when you are grumpy or when you are unkind. A message of pure, unconditional love. There is nothing that you can do that will make me stop loving you. I am always here for you. From all of this, a child develops the internal blueprint that you are worthy of love, worthy of all the good stuff in life and relationships.
Or did the child receive very different messages? You're ugly, naughty, lazy, stupid, greedy. You're demanding, annoying, boring. People don't want to be near you. People can't cope with your anger, distress, fear, hunger. They may be consistently neglectful of a child's needs, or meet the needs sometimes but appear rough and angry when they do. The child learns the message that they're not worthy of good care. People will only like you when you're achieving or behaving. A message of conditional love and judgment. Your needs overwhelm people. From this, children learn a very different message. You are not worthy of love. Children who've experienced such trauma internalise these messages and develop an inner blueprint that they are bad, leading to high levels of what Dan Hughes calls toxic shame.
Shame may have been used to control behaviour. You're too loud, you're in the way, you're rubbish, look what you made me do. Blame, which then creates shame in the child. A child may learn from this that this is how you control others. Neglect can create shame. I am not good enough even to be fed or have appropriate clothes. This gives the message that you are not even worth my attention.
Children can internalise their parents' shame. Again, we learn so much from our parents. If they've been through the child protection system, then this can be an intensely shameful experience for parents, which can be passed on to their children. Shame in parents may cause them to have a strong need for their children to behave and use shame to achieve this. If we're honest, shame can sometimes creep into everyday parenting because of our own shame triggers around others judging how we're parenting our children. Checking out and being aware of our own shame triggers can help us all to avoid them influencing our relationships with our children.
Dan Hughes in his work talks specifically about shame in relation to children who have experienced early developmental trauma. He describes what he calls healthy shame and toxic shame. With healthy shame, a child experiences guilt and then their parent swoops in and provides regulation and repair. They hold the emotion with the child and guide them through it safely. From this, the child builds self-worth and an inner working model that they are good enough and deserving of love. However, with toxic shame, a child experiences guilt in the same way, but this time there is a lack of regulation or repair from the responsive adult. This causes a loss of safety and the child has to deal with their emotions alone. The only way a young child can make sense of maltreatment is by blaming themselves. They must be bad. Shame becomes part of the child's identity and develops into toxic shame, where the child experiences themselves as shameful, unworthy and bad. This inner working model becomes the filter through which they see the world, one where they feel that they are not deserving of the good stuff. While many of us who may have received good enough care when we were young will still experience shame during our lives, this will not be frequent and we can probably recall the moments when we have felt shame. However, a child who has experienced developmental trauma may experience toxic shame on a daily basis due to their strong lack of worthiness.
Dan Hughes looks at some of the behaviours that a child can present when they are regularly experiencing toxic shame. This list isn't exhaustive and a child won't show all of these behaviours. If we think of them as survival responses against shame, they will most likely have some preferred behaviours that have worked for them in the past. Many of the children we work with may have difficulty regulating emotions. Some may appear chronically angry. Some children are controlling of others as it's just too risky for them to place their trust in others because of what has happened to them. Some experience themselves as shameful. Some can't look at themselves in the mirror due to seeing themselves as bad. Some children may use lies, excuses and blaming others to deflect shame away from them. Some will minimise problems. What's the big deal? Whereas others may show rage when issues are addressed. A very common difficulty is accepting praise, and we see this in lots of children, but presenting in different ways. The core of the relationship between a parent and child needs to be based on acceptance, not evaluations. Many children who've experienced early trauma struggle to believe this for better or worse concept, even though they are now with responsive and loving caregivers. When children don't feel accepted for who they are unconditionally, instead of experiencing praise safely, they can experience it as pressure to do well or be good. Some children lap praise up, but in an unhealthy way, as it feeds their self-worth. They can believe that they are wanted for how good they are and not who they are. Many adopted children do not feel accepted for who they are. They also have a negative self-concept, which means praise doesn't fit with how they see themselves. Instead, it can make them feel anxious and often motivated to prove you wrong as they don't deserve it. We see many children who cannot manage praise and will reject or sabotage it as it makes them so uncomfortable.
Self-esteem is the ability to see yourself as a flawed individual but still hold yourself in high regard. This is what many children struggle with. We need children to feel special just because they exist and not because of what they do. Self-worth and self-esteem are not about being perfect, but believing that you are lovable.
Dan Hughes suggests ways to limit a child's experience of toxic shame and boost worthiness, and we're going to consider these now. Firstly, encouraging regulation through joint activities, staying close with empathy. Time spent together, not with an end goal for the activity, but simply to be in each other's company. These do not have to be grand days out together, rather they can be little and often moments of time where your full attention is on the child. Your presence offers safety to the child and your child receives the message that they are special to you. It's not you, it's the behaviour. It was wrong to do that versus you did that because you wanted to have it your own way. Avoid making assumptions about the reasons for behaviour. Don't discuss any motives for behaviour until you are both calm. Only then can we offer acceptance while being curious with a child. Boundaries are still needed, behaviour may still need to be limited, but acceptance for the child's inner world does not.
When both parent and child are feeling calm, explore the behaviour in a wider context. A child may assume they misbehave because they are bad. They often can't see the link between past trauma and present behaviour. By showing acceptance, curiosity and empathy, a child can start to be open to the possibility that this is not the case. Repair the relationship as soon as possible. It's not our relationship that's at risk here, it's me teaching you. Dan Hughes uses the expression connection before correction, as withdrawal of the relationship can increase shame levels for the child. Connection, however, limits shame and boosts worthiness by providing safety and promoting trust. Remind a child that your relationship is always okay. Behaviour may not be necessarily, but the core of your relationship always will be. Give explicit messages that your relationship is for better or for worse, so that when the child learns over time to anticipate safety rather than threat and trust that the relationship is truly unconditional.
Dan Hughes devised his list of S's to both increase and decrease self-worth and self-esteem for a child. Some of the meanings are obvious, but it's useful to pick out a few and expand a little. In terms of raising a child's self-worth, he talks about safety, success and smiles, structure, supervision, soothing and sensory integration. This needs to be a slow, gentle and patient process that's at the child's pace. If a child comes to accept comforting, they will one day believe that they are worthy of being comforted. Pay attention to a child's sensory processing needs, as this is closely linked to their ability to regulate their emotions. Notice the sensory activities that help to regulate and calm your child. Storytelling. A monotone voice can convey lecture and judgment to a hypervigilant child. Dan Hughes uses a storytelling voice that is modulated with rhythm and inflections that remains curious and playful, keeping a child open to engage with you. Storytelling before bed is also a lovely way to be naturally close before sleep, without it feeling too intense for a child who may struggle with physical contact. Seeking meaning, special, sleep and self-care for parents and carers. Adults can easily feel shame about why they can't make things right for their child who may be struggling due to early trauma. So it's really important to be kind to yourself and check out the drivers for any shame triggers. Having a sense of humour. Saying sorry to your child if you get it wrong not only earns respect from your child but also provides great modelling to a child who may struggle with acceptance. In terms of things to reduce shame itself, stimulation, know your child's limits and what they can manage. Overstimulation can lead to dysregulation, as even positive emotions can feel overwhelming. Try to know your child's window of tolerance and understand your own as well. Shouting. Sarcasm confuses children. Children exposed to early trauma need clarity and predictability, but sarcasm just makes them mixed up about what's happened. Seclusion. Should, as in, she should be able to do that at her age. Secrets. Children need to know about their past, but obviously at a pace and level appropriate for them. Dan Hughes says this can cause some anxiety in the short term, but in the long term, it gives them a foundation of truth upon which to develop a secure base.
In terms of building shame resilience in ourselves and in our children, Brené Brown suggests several points. We need to recognise shame and its triggers, what it feels like in us and what it looks like in our children. Be aware of triggers for ourselves and learn what triggers your child's sense of toxic shame. Reaching out to someone who deserves to hear the story. We need to choose the person who hears our story carefully so we receive an empathic and helpful response. We need to encourage our children to do the same and respond with empathy and acceptance when they share their story with us. Share your shame story. When we speak our shame, it doesn't own us anymore. The power in shame is significantly reduced when we talk to someone who deserves to hear. Reality check the messages behind the shame. Is it really just me? Am I really that bad? Do they really think that? Check out what is driving the feelings of shame and whether they are real or actually just thoughts that are not necessarily truths. Practicing this ourselves is really good modelling again for our children, and helping them practice it too is a tool that will really help them deal with shame episodes over time. It's impossible to avoid triggering a child who experiences toxic shame, but we can help them manage it over time by catching those feelings of shame and dealing with them before they take control. Practicing and encouraging shame resilience will help both parent and child develop effective tools that will also in turn raise their sense of worthiness.
We'll leave you with a question to think about specifically for your child. What might make a positive difference to your child's sense of worthiness and shame resilience? Think about what we've talked about today and try to pull out the things that resonate for your child.
Thank you for watching this webinar. We hope it's been useful for you. If you'd like any more information about CFAS webinars or services, then please contact us via the contact details on our website.